Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the today's digital dialogue being hosted by Broadband India Forum on the Draft IT Rules 2026. Uh, Before we get started with the uh, discussion on the roundtable, I would request President BIF, Mr. TV Ramachandran, to give the opening welcome remarks and do a context setting for today's panel discussion. Over to
Uh,
you, TV sir, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Debu. Good afternoon to you all distinguished participants, my dear friends, dear colleagues, and others. It is indeed my proud privilege to welcome you all to this BIF Digital Dialogue. Digital Dialogue is our trademark product in which we have engaged in small discussions. And we welcome you today to today's Digital Dialogue, which is on the Evolving IT Draft Rules 2026 framework, particularly in the context of platform governance for both user-generated content and market players-generated content. At the outset, let me thank our eminent speakers and panelists who have taken time to join us for what I hope will be a timely and important discussion. I'm taking the liberty of making a few introductory remarks as requested by my team. Although by no stretch of imagination, I could be considered a domain expert or a domain knowledgeable person in this area, but please bear with me for that. As one closely involved with the broadband ecosystem in the holistic fashion, both the demand and supply side, I can safely claim that we meet today at a pivotal moment in India's digital journey. Over the past decade, India has emerged undoubtedly as one of the world's largest and most vibrant digital ecosystems, fastest growing, powered by affordable connectivity, digital public infrastructure, which is quite amazing by the world standards, and an explosion of platforms, a veritable explosion of platforms enabling user-generated content, innovation, and enterprise participation at scale, not in tiddly-biddly bits, but at scale. Today, we can proudly claim that hundreds of millions of Indians are not just consumers. Many of us are creators also, influencers, entrepreneurs, and service providers. Those opportunities have come by virtue of many platforms. These platforms have become veritable digital marketplaces for ideas, services, and economic activity. And are increasingly, the content itself is commerce, communication, community, all of it together. So it's a very vibrant living entity. This transformation, while empowering, also brings with it, as you would appreciate, new and complex challenges of governance. And the core requirement at the heart of the IT Rules 2026 is and will be a fundamental and sensitive balancing act of three key issues. One, safeguarding users from harm, misinformation, malicious actors. Secondly, ensuring accountability of platforms. You can't have an explosion of platforms and leave them to run amok. You have to have accountability of market platforms and market participants. And while concomitantly, we also ensure preservation of innovation, freedom of expression, and ease of doing business. All these have to be done concurrently. And this is by no means an easy equilibrium to achieve, as you would all realize. It's a very, very tough thing we are onto. Over-regulation, as you all know, risks stifling of innovation and raising compliance burdens, particularly for startups and smaller players. Bigger players may be able to manage and survive and grow, but smaller players will get quashed. So that's one concern for BIF, which is particularly looking after smaller players. And then under-regulation, on the other hand, risks erosion of trust, user harm, and systemic vulnerabilities. The challenge is therefore not whether to regulate, but how to regulate intelligently and proportionately. It has to be proportionate. Our discussions today, today's deliberations, are particularly significant because they will touch upon several critical dimensions. At this stage, I dare not try and steal even a teeny-weeny bit of my colleague Debu's thunder, because he is going to have the thunder as a moderator. And I'm sure he and the eminent panelists and you all of this distinguished audience later in the open Q&A would debate the key issues which will be concerning dealing appropriately with different categories of actors, individual, influencers, creators, etc., etc. Platform accountability versus safe harbor. You'd be hopefully we would avoid turning platforms into overcautious gatekeepers. Then you'll be talking about compliance framework, aspects of that, and how do we ensure transparency, fair grievance redressal for consumers, protection against arbitrary takedowns, while still enabling swift, legitimate action against harmful content. From BIF's viewpoint, our standpoint as a think tank, a few guiding principles remain at the heart of our deliberations and recommendations, always. One, technology neutrality and light touch regulation. Second, clarity and certainty in definitions and obligations. Thirdly, proportionality based on scale and impact. Encouragement of innovation and competition. And above all, I repeat, above all, an inclusive, safe, and trust-based digital ecosystem. India's regulatory approach must continue to be forward-looking, ensuring that we do not inadvertently constrain the very dynamism that has made India a global digital powerhouse. The decisions we shape today could have far-reaching implications for India's startup ecosystem, for global digital platforms operating in India, for millions of creators, for millions of you and me, and for every user. Therefore, we are seeing that in many ways, platform governance, to which we are repeatedly referring, is becoming as foundational as the connectivity itself in shaping the digital economy. So, in conclusion, as we begin today's discussion in this digital dialogue, I would seriously encourage all participants to engage freely and frankly with openness of thought, a balanced perspective, and a shared commitment to India's long-term digital growth and global leadership. With that, I once again welcome all of you and look forward to a rich and insightful discussion. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, TV sir, for those very excellent and thoughtful opening remarks and for setting the context for today's discussion. Without any further delay, let us begin the roundtable discussions. But before we actually do that, I just want to walk everyone through the flow of today's discussion. So we'll have 2 rounds of questions, which will be addressed to all the panelists, one by one. And we would be giving them about 4 to 5 minutes for answering each question. that will be posed to them. And it'll be done in 2 rounds. First round, one set of questions, then again followed by the second round. After which we will have a closing round where all the speakers will be asked to maybe go ahead give their suggestions on one particular aspect of the overall theme. And this will be followed, and we expect this to be done in about 40 to 45 minutes, followed by a audience Q&A, where we expect the audience who are participating to also ask questions to the panelists. I would request all of the people in the audience to kindly use the chat functionality, which is there in the platform on the platform, to be used for raising. You can please go onto the chat, click the chat, and post your questions. And I assure you, time permitting, we will definitely take all the questions that we can and respond to them. So this will be followed by a summation and a vote of thanks. This will be the flow. Without any further delay, let me start the panel discussion. We have a bunch of eminent panelists. I will start with Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari, a very eminent personality in the space of tech policy, who has worked with MeitY for several years and is a well-known expert in this subject matter. I would like to first start with him. So, by trying to understand the intent behind the new draft IT rules 2026. So, Rakesh sir, my question to you is, if one steps back from the text of the draft amendments and looks at the broader policy context, what do you think is the regulatory gap that MeitY, Ministry of Electronics and IT, is seeking to address through these amendments? This is my question to you. I hope I am clear, sir. Thank you. Over.
So thank you very much for maybe having me here. So, sir, first of all, the intent of the government is, as conveyed by TVR, sir, is to ensure that we have a safe, trusted, and accountable ecosystem, which is continuously evolving. And the tools which are available to us from MeitY perspective is, one, the IT Act, and two, the DPDP Act. Now, within the IT Act also, what we have is Section 79, and more precisely, Section 79(2)(c), which empowers government to issue whatever it considers as the reasonable due diligence to be observed by the platforms that it is handling. Of course, within the IT Act, we also have powers under Section 69A. And put together, these are practically few sections which in a way are the governing sections in respect of all the digital platforms that we have. Having said so, over a period of time, maybe certain gaps keep coming or certain things require to be clarified, which is what precisely has been attempted as far as this particular set of amendment is concerned, draft amendment is concerned. Maybe to start with, the clarification in respect of retention of records, which I believe, while the IT rules had categorically talked about 6 months of records to be retained, whether user deletes, whether platform deletes certain posts, or whether on the request of government certain posts which are considered to be unlawful are to be removed. But it also, because if you are deleting an account, you are also deleting the personal data, and hence there was, at least to my understanding, an overlap between what these IT rules mention versus the DPDP Act and the rules which have conveyed certain retention period requirements. So in order to clearly give reasonably good space to all these things, all these acts and rules, that such a clarification has been brought forward. So is the case in respect of various advisories, guidelines, directions which are issued by the ministry from time to time. I take into account FAQs also. Now here also, maybe while the advisories have been issued, particularly in terms of volume, it is the advisory which have been the maximum number of times the communication has been made. Advisories are always issued based on emerging issues at that particular time and are always supposed to be an interpretation of the existing IT rules at that moment as applied in that particular context or maybe for that particular platform. While the advisories have been issued, the fact also remains as to how do we measure the effectiveness of such advisories. And because they have been issued under the IT rules, the intent, therefore, of the ministry, it appears, is therefore they should be considered as an extension of IT rules itself, should be enforceable, and therefore ministry should be empowered to be able to seek compliance with respect to any such, I'll say, clarification in such any such advisories, any such guidelines, any such directions which the ministry issues. And lastly, of course, because of the AOBR allocation of business rule, which is now pretty old, but the direction was very clear. I mean, right from 2020, in September 2020, when the AOBR for MeitY was declared, that for the online news platforms, for the online publishers, it will be Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, which will be regulating them. Once again, to the limitation of the Act, because that's the only thing which is available to us is IT Act. The only thing which is available within IT Act is Section 79 and 69, through which we try to maybe regulate the online news part also. So while the publisher part was already conveyed, the fact also remains that it can be a user who may be, say, for example, posting a piece of what has already been published, or maybe posting a piece of new news related item. So while publisher or entities were already covered, an attempt has been made to cover all those users and entities which either as user, professional user, novice user, professionally recognized agencies are directly or indirectly communicating the news, and if it has a harm potential, then maybe some sort of a mechanism to be made available, which was already being exercised by MeitY as of today. But because of the AOBR and clarity of AOBR, which is emerging day by day, that this piece is therefore being practically handed over to MIB to take care, so that their understanding of the news related items continues to be in sync in respect of whatever they decide. So these were at least at least in the immediate context, these were the probably I'll say reasons for initiating this change. Rest, of course, we already have by now lots of iterations in the IT rules, which also continue to convey the need to contain such, particularly when things go wrong, to need to contain things in a very time bound manner.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for the very exhaustive understanding and giving us the perspective of what government is thinking when they actually made the draft rules. Thank you, sir. Continuing on our journey of trying to understand the shift which is behind the draft IT rules, I would now like to call upon our next panelist, who is a very distinguished legal luminary and has also been in this policy and regulation space for tech policy for many years. I'd like to call upon Sri Abhishek Malhotra ji. Abhishek, sir, my question to you is, from a legal standpoint, how significant is this proposal to make compliance with advisories, clarifications, SOPs, and similar ministry issued instruments part of an intermediary's due diligence obligations? And in your opinion, what does this mean for the interpretation and operation of Section 79, which guarantees safe harbor? Over to you, Abhishek sir, for this. I hope I'm
Thank
clear.
you. Yes, you are. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me as part of this panel. So, I think for the audience, some of them may already have some amount of training in how the law works in our country. But just sort of to set the tone for this, because the question that I'm going to answer would necessitate some sort of a background understanding of how the law works. So, at the highest level, we have the Constitution of India. Then we have statutes, legislations that are passed by Parliament or in relation to state subjects of state legislatures. Those laws authorize the executive to, under certain provisions, enact or notify rules. Now, there's a specific rule-making power in nearly all legislations. And as Mr. Maheshwari said before me, in order to address the developing situation in any particular industry or the subject matter of a legislation, it is not always easy to go back to Parliament and seek an amendment to the Act to address the development that is taking place. Accordingly, this rule-making power is given to the executive, and the relevant nodal ministry under the allocation of business rules is empowered to notify those rules. In addition to those rules, there are various other instruments. Some of them were mentioned by you in your question itself, which is basically advisories, SOPs, guidelines. There could be some regulations, etc. Now, while it is required under most legislations, including the IT Act, that the rules that are to be notified typically are to be placed before Parliament for ratification, the same level of scrutiny is usually not subjected to aspects such as guidelines, SOPs, etc. Accordingly, in terms of the strength of what is applicable and enforceable, as I said, it will be the constitution, the legislation, the rules. When it comes to SOPs, guidelines, and advisories, etc., typically they are considered to be not mandatory. They are considered to be guidances that are provided for businesses for better implementation of the law or better implementation of the rules. What often happens, however, is, I won't say often happen, but what sometimes does happen is that there seems to be a conflict or an overreach, which seems to be reflected in advisories, SOPs, and guidelines, because it may be possible that the trappings or the contours of what the legislation provides in this, what we are talking about in the intermediary liability and protection. Again, stepping back for a bit, normally, if a platform, let's assume we did not have the intermediary protection, a platform which is posting content, which content is otherwise illegal. It may be defamatory, it may be infringement of intellectual property rights, it may be barred by any other part of the law. The intermediary would normally be also liable as a secondary infringer. But Section 79 introduces what's called a safe harbor, in recognition of the fact that increasingly there are these, if I may call them, animals called platforms that do not have control over what is going to be put on those platforms, and therefore their position vis-a-vis such content is reactive and not proactive. That is the reason why safe harbor provisions were introduced to say, if you, the platform, are not participating, or you have not contributed to that content, or you have, after being given notice that this content is infringing with a particular law, not taken steps to take it down, then your liability will also kick in. But till such time that happens, if you are complying with those safeguards, then you will not be liable. So essentially, the IT rules, when they came about, they were to provide the contours of what it is that the platforms need to be careful about, what is the action that they need to take, and therefore what are the governance principles that they are subjected to. When we go into the domain of SOPs and guidances, etc., just taking a leaf from what Mr. Maheshwari said, the government is basically trying to, as per whatever is coming, coming as a justification, what the government is trying to do is perhaps try and make things clearer than they potentially are in the IT rules. My problem with that from a purely legal perspective, maybe practically it's feasible, maybe practically it's required. From a legal standpoint, we have this concept of separation of powers. The legislature enacts, the executive implements and enforces, and the judiciary interprets. When the executive gets into the domain of interpretation, is where some problems do exist and they do crop up. And it's essentially to take care of the fusion or stepping into another's domain of trying to, let's say, interpret in this case or legislate by virtue of the SOPs, etc. That's where the friction comes in, and that's where such advisories, SOPs, etc., if they are made binding, then they become a problem and they can potentially be challenged. So that's broadly the conspectus of the legal proposition with regard to this. I hope I've answered your question, Latika.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Continuing with the theme of this particular round of questions, which is trying to understand the shift which has prompted the government to come out with these draft IT rules, I would now call upon my next panelist, which is Mr. Kumar Deep, who's a tech policy expert. I would ask Mr. Kumar Deep, my question to him is, from the perspective of global digital firms, and he represents a number of them under his leadership under ITIC, and the broader innovation ecosystem, what would be the proposed framework? What would the proposed framework look like from an operational perspective? And do you anticipate any changes in how these platforms design products, moderate content, or make investment decisions, keeping in view the changes that are being proposed in the draft IT rules? I hope my question is clear, Kumar Deep. Sir, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you, Broadband India Forum, for convening this very important dialogue on the evolving India's digital policy framework. I would personally like to thank TV sir, who happens to be my ex-boss as well, and with whom I have known for at least 2 decades now, for inviting me for this session. Thank you, Debashish, for the question, and a warm welcome and a hello to all my fellow panelists, many of whom with whom I work continuously. Before I jump into the basics of the question, let me caveat it by saying that as ITI, which is Information Technology Industry Council, which represents, I think, the entire spectrum, entire tech spectrum, and with our member companies, offices present in every continent on the globe except for perhaps Antarctica. So as ITI, we do not comment on content moderation frameworks or policies. However, broadly, what I can share with this very eminent group are some of the recent trends that have emerged in policy making. I think Rakesh, sir, when he was talking, he mentioned the broad framework under which India's digital policy domain is governed. He was very specific, sections 79 2C of the IT Act and 69A, as well as the evolving digital personal data protection rules, which are still to be fully implemented, even though the rules have been in place for some time. But then I just wanted to talk about some of the recent trends which will help us understand that how, or which will perhaps serve as a guidance as to how some of these platforms, some of these companies can make their products for future in this evolving landscape. One, and before I jump into that, I would like to read a recent tweet, not a recent tweet, uh, a recent post by Mr. Shashi Tharoor, and he writes that there is an alarming number of deepfake videos circulating of me with convincing sounding AI-generated voiceovers over genuine footage of old interviews, having me saying things I have never said. Disappointed that so many on social media believing these lies and issuing baseless comments attacking me for views that I have not expressed. That is Mr. Shashi Tharoor. It's a long post, but he has posted it a short while back. Now, why did I read out that tweet was because what we are seeing over the past few years is that most of these digital domain policies, so these which includes the advisories, the SOPs, etc., in the past few years have a seasonality, i.e., they are getting clustered together around political events. In this case, it being the election. So whether it is the central elections, which happened in 2024, which was interpreted by many as being a social media platform first election, and then of course state elections, and we have plenty of them happening all around all the time throughout the year. So people are running from one election to the other. So those digital policies, advisories, SOPs, or rules are coming in or clustered around those events is what we are seeing. Exhibit A was what Shashi Tharoor just posted, and therefore it relates to what we are talking about. So there are various advisories, SOPs. Now, when we talk about, there's another aspect that I wanted to touch upon with regards to the recent amendments to the IT rules, which Abhishek ji also mentioned, was with regards the advisories, the guidelines, SOPs. Do they have a legal foundation? The government has issued them from time to time. The current amendments to the IT rules, according to what I have heard in those closed door discussions with the government, was that they aim to give a retrospective legal sanctity to these advisories. Now, they intend to do it, but perhaps we will have to turn to Abhishek ji to understand if it will stand legal scrutiny, or it could be legal scrutiny, or it has to be taken to court, challenged, etc. The other issue with regards the advisories or the SOPs are that they are very often issued without any proper consultation, or even if there is a consultative window which is provided for the stakeholders, which includes the users, which includes civil society, which includes the platforms themselves, and maybe the media as well, is that there should be a robust stakeholder consultation before issuing those advisories, and it should not be what Abhishek ji said, that the legislature jumping into the executive powers of as a pillar of the state. So these are some of the challenges with regard to these advisories. And to be fair, whether the Section 79(2)(c) of the IT Act provides a legal sanctity to the SOPs and guidelines which have been issued in the past. Also, some of these guidelines, SOPs, have been found to be contradicting each other. They have been issued selectively to a bunch of companies operating in the same domain, read platform, and not to everybody else. So those are the kind of things which have happened in the past. Perhaps the current IT rules aim to, smoothen out or wrinkle out that process and provide some kind of a legal sanctity, and come out with a bunch of, as a master circular, as I heard Secretary MeitY talk about and agree to, that they will make a compendium of sorts of all the past advisories, SOPs, and put it out in the digital domain as a master circular. An example was given of the master circular format that is used by RBI. But again, we will have to wait and watch. But this backdoor entry of advisories, SOPs having a legal sanctity as a law, which has been legislatively scrutinized and therefore has a legal sanctity, is something which we find, or at least I find, to be something which is contentious and which needs to be looked into. So, therefore, and everybody knows that if there is a regulatory ambiguity around, if there is a regulatory ambiguity, if there is a sort of a vacuum which exists, or if the policy space is such that you show me the base, you show me the face, I will tell you the I'll tell you the law, then perhaps a bit of investment dries up. It could lead to stifling of innovation and introduction of new products and services to a very prosperous and very ambitious India's digital economy. And so those are the challenges which I think are need to be addressed before we move on to the next bunch of digital policy regulations. Also, I would caveat that. Also, I would like to add that at one point of time, and I think Rakesh ji was still at MeitY. Rakesh ji and others had thought about completely doing away with the IT Act of 2021. Given that the technology has changed, the world has changed since then, and replacing it with something which was sort of a Digital India Act, which was sort of a guiding principles, a framework, providing those guardrails instead of having bound rules. Maybe one could look at reviving that if possible. I'll leave it at that. Over to you, Debashish ji.
Thank you. Thank you, Kumardeep, for the excellent response. We would now move on to round two, the second round of questions, in which we examine the implications of the draft IT rules on the overall digital economy. In this set of questions, my first panelist that I would wish to call upon to answer my next question would be Mr. Abhishek Malhotra. Abhishek, sir, my question to you is, the draft IT rules also brings user-generated news and current affairs content within the ambit of Part 3 alongside intermediaries. From a constitutional and administrative law perspective, what questions does that raise, particularly in relation to the treatment of registered publishers and ordinary users? I hope I'm clear, sir.
You are, sir.
Abhishek, over to you, sir.
No, thank you for that question. And it's, I think for the general public, this question assumes a lot of significance because the extension of the liability is being sort of made to individuals, not just the publishers. Coming back again to the IT rules of 2021 as amended from time to time. These have been notified under Section 79, in pursuant to Section 79, read with, of course, the rule-making power in 87. So ultimately, the focus of these rules is whether or not, and if so, under what circumstances, intermediary safe harbor is to be provided. Typically, till now, intermediaries were essentially considered as platforms, companies, corporate entities, news publishers, not individuals. It's individuals' user-generated content that was going on to these platforms and for which there was or there was not liability for the intermediaries based upon whether the safe harbor exists or it does not, in terms of whether compliance is carried out. Now, see, the point is, therefore, the person who was always supposed to be liable for the content that they were posting on such platforms, if that content was infringing, was the individual user. There are two conflicting thoughts that I have on this. The first, these rules are not meant to apply to individual user who's setting up the user-generated content on the platform. They are supposed to apply to platform intermediaries, because it's not the intermediaries that are really acting in that regard. It is the individual who's doing so. So that being the case, will it not be incongruous in actually seeking to extend this, whether there is a protection or not, to individuals? That's a question that is out there. I still haven't got an answer as to whether or not, as to why this was done, because there is already an existing liability of individuals who act in a manner where they know that there is whatever the action is or whatever content they're posting is possibly illegal or infringing. To bunch them up with publishers is again incongruous, because you are earlier treating primary liability and secondary liability as separate issues. Now you're bunching them together and fusing the issue concept of liability. So there is a lot of confusion as to what is sought to be achieved by this process of bringing into context of making extending liability to individuals. And yes, in today's world, one could argue that an individual also becomes a self-publisher when they put out their content on the internet, on any particular platform. To that extent, the liability of the individuals remains as is. There is no difference in that. The liability of the platform is still governed by the IT rules, which is why I'm saying I really don't understand what was the reason for issuing such an advisory when the law is very clear on that. In fact, if anything, it will actually create further confusion on this regard.
Thank you so much, sir, for that very, very erudite answer. I'd now like to request my next panelist, Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari. I would to ask him the next question. My question to Sir Rakesh sir is, sir, what do you think are the implications for this IT Act amendment, draft IT rules on digital news distribution, creator ecosystems, and the vibrancy of online public conversation? Over to you, sir.
So
I hope I have been clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
First of all, I completely agree with Abhishek sir when he says that what additional that we have brought in by putting all these words in this particular draft. At least I am also of the same opinion. As far as, so maybe we now take up your question and put it in two parts. One, with respect to the digital news publishers, is there any change? I'll say practically no, because that their liability continues to be existing the same way as it was. The Madras High Court, the Bombay High Court orders, wherein they have partly put in abeyance Rule 9, Rule 9.1 and 9.3, continues to be there in place. Maybe what has been, so practically nothing has been brought as a change in respect of what the expectation from the digital news publishers and professional creators are. With respect to the users, once again, user generated content, whether it is in the form of news or maybe non-news, whichever way you call it, it is a user generated content. Good, not so good, completely illegal, attracting 69A terms and attracting 69A provisions. If it is attracting 69A provisions, so far, with respect to the user generated content, MeitY had been, taking requests from the designated nodal points, have a well-defined mechanism of getting it addressed through 69A. Of course, ask the concerned intermediary platform wherever this content is to be able to for taking it down, or maybe if it calls for action through ISPs, then blocking it. So per se, the only shift I believe which has happened is that maybe for certain types of user generated content, the Ministry A has changed to Ministry B. The difference which is now is that the Ministry B has a different interdepartmental committee. I mean, that composition is a bit different from the committee which MeitY has. And hence, the way the things shall be seen will be a bit different. Point number 2, which has been brought, is that the request can directly flow from the ministry to the IDC, which is also headed by a senior officer of the same ministry. But because the request is coming from the ministry and the request has to be approved by the ministry, I mean, even after the IDC makes a recommendation, this creates a conflict of, I'll say, the roles and responsibility. The same person is the doer, the same person is like an approver. In fact, the same person is making a request. And to that extent, the impartiality of this IDC, I mean, this was there in the earlier version also. By the way, this question of impartiality was there in the earlier version also. But because the scope has been changed from MeitY to MIB in respect of user-generated content, when the request comes from the MIB and is taken by IDC, recommended back to IDC, I mean MIB secretary, and thereafter the specific post of the user or maybe the complete account of the user is taken. To me, it's a bit of conflicting role, not a neutral role. And the second, which was already there, maybe as far as publishers were concerned, by way of Rule 5, we were mentioning that those publishers who are coming on the intermediary platform, intermediary should inform them. In a way, most of the time it will be a social media platform who shall inform them that please get registered with MIB. And then when you come back to us, we will give you some visible mark. Normally, we are not really talking about Rule 5, which was having such a provision. Now, per se, this continues to be the same. And maybe once again, in a way, I mean, more or less, my answer is over. To me, the digital news publishers practically remain in the same way. Yeah, the point which I wanted to convey was that in Rule 12, Rule 14, the rules mention that an effort will be made to identify the user. So in respect of publisher, it was easy to identify the publisher because publisher has already gone through the MIB route, but the user has not gone. The IDC is not competent enough to be able to seek details of the users from the platforms, because that is something which only investigating authority, police can ask. So this is a bit of contradiction which is happening by virtue of moving this set of users from MeitY to MIB. And the way the rules have been framed, it has actually created a bit of ambiguity rather than solving it. But the intent of the government was clear. Something which is relatable to news, something which is relatable to current affairs should ideally be dealt by MIB and not by MeitY. That's all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for the very detailed response, sir. I would now move on to our next panelist in the second round of questions, and that is to Mr. Kumardeep. Mr. Kumardeep, my question to you is, if one takes a step back from this specific draft, what direction do you think the digital policy framework is headed towards, particularly from a global standpoint? My request to you is to keep the answer as brief as possible in the overall interest of time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Most of the evolving digital policy framework that we see is a trickle-down effect of Europe's DSA Act, which is the Digital Services Act. What we are seeing is that there are requirements of several governments, that there are mandatory transparency and risk mitigation requirements. Regulators are requiring platforms to assess, report, mitigate systematic risks, such as the spread of disinformation, election interference, etc. Shift to a systematic accountability. Policies are moving to beyond holding platforms liable for individual pieces of content to holding them accountable for their systems, design, algorithms, and content curation practices. What we sometimes called I mentioned the European Digital Services Act is heavily influencing global regulators, posing many changes and forcing many companies to adopt higher transparency and standards, which are in a way universal in nature. I do not know whether that term can be used such liberally. And I say that with a little bit of responsibility. Users' rights and redressals, a major focus is moving towards giving users tools to appeal to content takedowns and understand why content was recommended to be removed. There is a rise of co-regulation is what we are seeing. Many nations are adopting frameworks that combine state set penalties or fines with industry developed codes or practices which are supervised by independent regulators. Again, independent, the word independent can be heavily loaded. There is a requirement for algorithmic transparency and auditability. There are trends for mandatory data access for researchers, stricter rules for larger platforms or classification of platforms into large, medium, and evolving. And then there is obviously combating lawful but awful content. Coming back to the question you had asked to Rakesh ji, what constitutes news? Can political satires be considered as news? Can commentaries, conversations, podcasts be considered as news? That is again left to people's interpretation, but that's what we are seeing. And then there is a data protection linkage where platform accountability is becoming tightly linked with data protection regulations, GDPR, DPDP, limiting how platforms or can use the data for targeted advertising. I'll leave it at that. There are many more points we can, talk about it at a later date, but given the paucity of time, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you.
Just
Thank
adding
you.
one more last bit, Devashish ji, to
Yeah,
the
please.
answers, and perhaps I forgot to mention that bit. Which, as I said, I'm standing by my initial assessment that there really nothing that has changed from the perspective. It's just, as I said, as Maheshwari said, there's a shift into part 3, which is dealt with by the MIB. But the question, nevertheless, and it's an important question, still remains with regard to the constitutionality of the IDC. Mr. Maheshwari himself highlighted those aspects. We use this particular term. Same person is judge, jury, executioner. So maybe that's using it in a little slightly dramatic sort of fashion. But the separation of powers aspect becomes extremely important. And the further issue with the IDC structure is the absence of even a judicial member to be able to make an assessment and interpretation of whether or not there has been an infringement. So just wanted to highlight that. Sorry.
Thank you, Abhishek ji. That was very helpful. As we come to the end of round 2, before we have hand it over to the audience for any audience questions that there may be, I would like to have a quick round of comments from our esteemed panelists. And I have a common question for all three of you, and I would request you to keep your response brief, preferably to 1 minute if possible. And my question to all of you is, if there was one thing that in your view, the policymakers should be mindful of, what would that be? Let me start with Rakesh ji. I hope I made my question clear. Over to you, Rakesh ji. Sir, you're on mute. We can't hear you, sir.
Yeah, so thank you, sir. The only thing which I would like to make is don't make too many changes too fast. It creates complications. So that's all, sir.
Thank you for
It
being
has
so
not really added value. The amount of effort which has gone in, actually, I don't know. What value addition have we done by making changes in part 3 this time?
Thank you. Abhishek ji, 1 minute response.
Very quick response.
Yeah.
In my view, the ideal of any regulatory environment is to achieve a situation where there's no regulation at all. So I think rather than move towards that, where you have greater sort of focus on self-regulation, I would want to head in that direction. This seems to be a situation where we're heading in the opposite one. So that's my 2 bits.
Debashis if I may jump in very quickly, I think my suggestion would be in this particular instance, echoing what Rakesh was saying, that instead of creating a confusion, the government should have taken some time and interdepartmentally they should have discussed. And I do not want to comment on the stakeholder consultations which happened, which I was a part of, which was fronted by one ministry, even though the powers are now going to another ministry. So there should have been a interdepartmental consultation, a robust consultation, who does what, why, what constitutes news, defining that or understanding the definitions before putting it out in a public domain. And, that creates a sense of lack of regulatory clarity for the, or that creates a negative picture for the ministry or for the government as a whole. And suddenly, if they have to, if there is a huge pushback, they have to take it back, then that's not the ideal situation to be in.
Thank you, Kumar Deepji. Thank you. We've come to the end of our panel discussion. I have a couple of questions from the audience. Since we have a few minutes to go, I'll probably take at least one of them. And the question is, can the user-generated news and current affairs content actually be regulated? If the law starts treating more and more forms of online expression as current affairs content, does the category eventually become too broad to be able to regulate it meaningfully? That's the question. It's open to all the panelists, any of the panelists who wishes to answer this question. In case it is not clear, should I repeat it again?
No, I mean, it's clear.
Okay. Over to you.
We'll completely
Rakeshji.
go with Kumar Deepji when he says, I mean, as to what exactly do we mean by online news and current affairs in the context of user-generated content. I completely agree once again. To me, any content which is putting sovereignty, integrity in danger, so all those 69A requirements is what is considered something which needs to be, should not be there on internet. Rest, everything else is a matter of expression, freedom of speech and expression. So whatever is the constitution, let's obey that. And that's all. I mean, with those guiding principles being there, we should not really create too much of departmentalization, compartmentalization, and with different authorities acting on the same piece of maybe matter, sometimes resulting in overlap, sometimes resulting in something getting just, falling through the cracks.
Thank you, Rakesh sir. The floor is open to others also, in case if you have a slightly different point of view or you want to augment what Rakesh sir said. Please
No, I
feel
think
free.
Rakesh sir's answer is quite succinct and comprehensive. So I don't think we need to add anything to it.
Thank you. Thank you. I had a look at the second question, which was on the implications of this broader approach for publishers for online curated content. I think that question has been already adequately answered in this during this panel discussion. So I don't feel the need for that question to be repeated here. So if there are any other questions from the audience, yes, there is. I would like to read it out for the sake of everybody's this thing. The question is, please explain how expanding the powers of the IDC under Rule 14 within brackets 2 does not amount to circumventing the provisions of the Bombay High Court and the Madras High Court, specifically the Code of Ethics Compliance Requirements and the three-tier oversight mechanism. The courts had found these provisions violative of the right to free speech. Second part to the question, what is the current legality of IDC? Is it operational or active now? If so, what is the real life relevance of it? If not, would the proposed draft IT rules bring it back? This is a pretty long question. Anybody?
So
Yeah,
Debashis,
please,
actually,
Abhishek.
I had answered that in the supplemental aspect that I had brought in my second answer to the second question, that the legality, of course, still remains questionable. That's my view. Whether it is practically operational, yes, it is. I'm in fact appearing in one matter tomorrow before the IDC. So therefore, it is practically still there. Whenever there is a response that is sent out to any show cause notice or any sort of a hearing notice that comes from them, there is always an advice to initially put that challenge to the jurisdiction up first, and then go on to without prejudice to that challenge, what are the answers and merits. So that still remains as an issue. It may have to be taken up once again, perhaps before the constitutional courts, before we have a finality on that decision.
Thank you, Abhishek ji. I don't see any further questions either on the chat or the Q&A. And we have already just hit the hour mark. So without wasting any time, let me take this opportunity to thank each and every one of our panelists, esteemed panelists who have joined today. Thank you, Rakesh sir. Thank you, Abhishek ji. Thank you, Kumardeep ji. And I thank each and every one of our attendees or the participants who have joined this meeting. I'd also like to thank our president, Mr. T.V. Ramachandran, for setting the context and giving the welcome remarks. I want to thank our Director General, Brigadier Anil Tandon. I'd like to thank our team members from the BIF Directorate, especially Shubhika and Ashika, who worked tirelessly to make this digital dialogue happen in such a short notice. With this, we thank each and everybody for having attended today's webinar. We would like to bring this to a close now. And thank you and bye-bye to each one and every one of you.
Thanks, everybody.
Jai Hind. Thank you.
Jai Hind. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.